Welcome to Hip Hop Now Podcast. If you're from the future, you know what to do. Get your ass out of here. Don't disrespect the legend. Hip hop is here to stay. Let's get right into the business. What up, y'all? I am your host, Vegas, and this is a Hip Hop Now Podcast bonus episode brought to you by the Patreon supporters over at patreon.com/hiphop. Now, you can see them in the video, scrolling past and present. If you would like to learn about what it is to be a Patreon supporter of this very podcast, click the link in the description of this episode. Now, if you've been following me for a little while, whether that be in audio form or video form on YouTube, you know that I've done a couple of ranking videos, right? Ranking episodes where I go look at a legendary artist and look at their catalog and rank their albums. And obviously, we can rank them on a scale of what the source used to be, right? 5 mics is classic, all the way down to 1, which I think is garbage. Double XL, right? Where double XL was a classic and small was garbage. But I like to do things a little bit differently and use quotes from that quotes or associated things or phrases from that artist. For example, right? I did one on Ghostface prior to his last album dropping, the Ghostfaces or whatever it was called. But yeah, like classic was like Blue and Cream, whatever it was. The last ranking I did was for Nas, which ironically was before Magic 3, because every time I do one of these, somebody drops an album. So we're hoping today. And with Nas, I had Nasty Nas as the classic category. So that's kind of what we do here. Another thing, I go back and listen because I own them, all of them. I go back and listen to each album again just to refresh my memory, get a little bit more context about my thoughts in regards to about like how I felt when I first heard it and how I feel now. So that when I rank these albums, I'm not ranking these albums off of a memory from 10, 20 plus years ago. I'm really it's fresh in my mind. And I encourage those who are interested to do the same. Now, today we're doing The Chef, Lex Diamond, Raekwon, the Chef, straight out of the Wu-Tang Clan, straight out of Shaolin, legendary hip hop artist, mostly known for his debut album, Only Built for Cuban Links, which some of us hip hop heads refer to it affectionately as the Purple Tape. For those who don't know, who said, why you call it the Purple Tape? Because when the cassette came out, it was purple. That's why. So affectionately referred to as the Purple Tape. And I think he's had an interesting career considering how much of a classic that first album was and what happened with the follow-up. And there are a lot of people who checked out after Raekwon's second album and probably came back for Cuban Link 2, which eventually happened, but then checked out again. So the whole objective here is to not only rank the albums, but to kind of give you an idea of what you may have missed if you haven't been following him. Now, he's done some mixtapes also, like he had a Vatican series mixtape and all of that. I'm not ranking mixtapes because mixtapes can get real fudgy, right? Like sometimes mixtapes don't have new songs on them with new beats. Some of them is freestyles over other beats. Sometimes it's songs pulled from albums. Like I think the Vatican had some songs that were on an album that was like he was basically advertising Cuban Link 2, and it had some songs from one of his albums. So it was just kind of like I'm not going to do mixtapes. If you want to check out his mixtapes, I saw that they had a few on Apple Music, and I'm sure they have some on Spotify. But this is strictly Raekwon albums, with the one exception being the team up album he did with Method Man and Ghostface. Raekwon, unlike Ghostface, doesn't have as many albums, and that could be a good thing, that could be a bad thing. It just depends. But let's get right into it. As you can see, the categories starting at the very top, which would be the classic position, and obviously starting at the bottom, right at the bottom, would be garbage. Okay, it means the album is garbage. No ifs, ands, or buts. So the classic category, we're going to refer to that as marvelous ish to get the mouth watered. Okay, when Raekwon said it, I just thought it was funny. And to me, it's the epitome of classic for this ranking system. Next, Strawberry Kiwi. That's equivalent to being a great album. Knowledge God means it's good. It's fine. It's good. It's not great. It's not classic, but it's not garbage. It's a good listen. Next, this one we start going down. Pause. Shark Biters. This is an album that just isn't good. Like it's for whatever reason, it's just not good. And lastly, Where My Killer Tape at, God. If you are a Wu-Tang fan, you know that's from the famous skit on 36 Chambers, Wu-Tang Clan's debut album, about Raekwon asking Method Man for his Master Killer tape. Where my killer tape at, God? Like, I ain't got you to say, yo, these had 40s and blunts just came up missing. So I chose to use that as the garbage one. So we're going to start from the first album and go all the way to his last album. And y'all already know there's no reason why this wouldn't go anywhere else but at the top. Marvelous to get the mouth watered. Like, that's what this is. Raekwon's debut album, only built for Cuban links, featuring Ghostface Killer. This was just a brilliant idea, not only to pair these two together because of their similarities, but they also complemented each other really well as far as personality, voice, the way they approach their rhymes. So many classic records on here, from Criminology to Knowledge God, right? Like Verbal Intercourse featuring Nas, like Heaven and Hell, and who can forget the hit single Ice Cream featuring Method Man on the hook, Ghostface, Capadonna. When I tell you, if you want, put it this way, in the same vein that people speak of Illmatic as an album, they need to talk about Only Built for Cuban Links in the same breath. The same way, like Nas with Illmatic, Big with Ready to Die, Ray and Ghost with Only Built for Cuban Links. It was just masterpieces, you know. And if you don't know, this album has, and really it's kind of been Raekwon's moniker in a lot of ways, has a lot of like street mafioso style to it. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of references to Coke and Scarface and the streets, even like the intro Striving for Perfection. Is just perfect because it's almost like a motivational speech for guys who are in the game, the drug game, and they want to get out. So they're gonna make this last score, which is like the also kind of like a black exploitation thing, right? Because black exploitation in the 70s, the hustler type movies, there was always like, we gotta do this one more thing and then we out the hood. Or similar to Menace to Society, right? Same thing. One more thing that I'm out, but we know how that goes. So no if and buts about it. Anybody who says this album is not a classic, you just get out of hip hop. Okay, get out. All right. But next up was Raekwon's follow-up to Only Built for Cuban Links, Immobilarity. And I'm not even gonna hold y'all. God, where my killer tape at? God, where my tape at? I'll let you hold it. My God. This has to be the one of the biggest sophomore jinx in the history of sophomore jinx. What made this album so disappointingly bad? Right, I was just gonna say disappointing, but we just gotta put bad in there also. Was the fact that everything I said about Only Built for Cuban Links was gone on this album. And did it have to duplicate or be the same thing as Purple Tape? Bars. No, it did not. But what's probably most notable in this situation is the production, because what made Only Built for Cuban Links so dope was like RZA on the production. It was like the perfect soundtrack to all those things I named about Ray and Ghost on our first project. You're not hearing from Ghost like that. I don't even think Ghost is on this album, to be honest. Ray has a new crew, new beats. I think the album cover's dope, but that's just about it. Most people, when they talk about this album and what they remember, they'll say the only song I liked on there was Sneakers. And that's pretty unanimous because that was a dope song. But beyond that, it's just so different. And not having that traditional Wu sound was a fatal mistake for Raekwon. And even if it's not coming from RZA, just having that aesthetic that reminds you of how you were introduced to him on 36 Chambers, how they follow that up with a blend of the kung fu and the mafioso style on Only Built for Cuban Links. So when you get this album, it's almost like what is this? Like this ain't no Martin Payne set. You know what I'm saying? Like what is this? So definitely, probably his worst album in his catalog for sure. So I don't remember exactly when this next album came out. I know it felt like it was maybe 3 or 4 years. But it's I believe it's called the Lex Diamond Story. Most people did not check for it, but I'm here to tell you, knowledge God. I think Raekwon redeemed himself in a lot of ways. Now, this album isn't Strawberry Kiwi or Marvelous to get the mouth watered, mainly because it starts really strong and then somewhere in the middle of the project is hit or miss, and there's a lot of skits, and the skits almost feel uneven because maybe the album, I don't know, it just didn't work. And especially towards the end, it's a lot of skips and there's a lot of songs. I think there's like 20 tracks. Obviously some of them are skits, but there are a lot of standout joints that give you that Wu feeling again, right? Ghostface is here, right? They got a song called The Watch. It is the most Ray and Ghost Wu Tang feel song ever. It's exactly what we wanted on Immobilarity, right? Just that vibe. And it was pretty dope. And there's other standout records on there also, including some features. I think he got a song with Fat Joe on there also. And it was, to me, it just worked, man. It just worked better. But again, I think people were so disappointed, or hip hop heads, specifically Raekwon fans of Cuban Link, were so disappointed with Immobilarity, and the fact that at that time a lot of Wu releases, like second releases from Wu-Tang Clan members, except for Ghostface, um, weren't good and were declining and kind of lacked that feel with the second album. So it was sophomore jinx all over the place. But I think Raekwon redeemed himself a little bit. If you never heard the Lex Diamond Story, you should check it out, because if you like Raekwon, I guarantee you there's enough songs on here that you would like, but there are some skip joints on here because when you look at the time, I think this was 2003, if I'm not mistaken. When you look at the time that this joint dropped, it sort of was party records was in full swing, and there's a couple records on there that they don't work as party records. Like the difference between what worked with Ice Cream was the fact that it was like Wu Tang's version of what a party record would be, or a record for the ladies, and it worked. It made most cats feel like, yeah, of course. Um, but the joint on here, there's one in particular, I forget the name. I was just like, ugh, this ain't it. This just reminds me of a time where this was the formula for party records. And a person like me who was probably still in the club at that time was feeling like, yeah, this formula is getting tired. So there you have it. I just want to say real quick, obviously, you can't ignore the fact that Cuban Link, that debut, had so much of an impact on Raekwon's career. It's almost as if he might as well call every album Cuban Link to get people interested, because the Lex Diamond story I thought was fun, and there's so many hip hop heads that they didn't listen. So let's get to the next joint. The next album, ironically, is Cuban Link 2, and that's Strawberry Kiwi got. Strawberry Kiwi. Raekwon is back, climbing back from the depths of immobility. A sequel to a classic album that you should probably never do a sequel to. And he got close, but no cigar. And let me tell you why. For everything that's so dope on this album, including Ghostface's back in the background and all of that, it was too many songs, way too many songs. And this was around the time where I believe Ray was signed with Dr. Dre. Dr. Dre had so many artists that just did Buster, Rakim, Ray. Like people forget with the connection with Ray. And I really didn't like those songs. Those beats felt so different from the tone that was set, that reminded you of Cuban Links in the other songs like House of Flying Daggers and stuff like that. Jay Dilla coming through doing a couple of joints. Ghostface with another standout verse on the album, even though he's featured throughout. And the lead single, New Woo, with Meth on the hook and Ray and Go. Yo, it was like the Woo is back. That W, it was back, but it was too long. And sure, Papa Wu was talking on the first one. Cool. And they started the album out with that. I skip it now because I even skip it at the end of Purple Tape. But it was dope. And even that the album cover, right? Like with the purple, like the whole vibe of Purple Tape. Now, I remember during the pandemic, Raekwon did an interview with I believe Hot 97, where he basically announced that he's working on Only Built for Cuban Links 3, because he felt like you can't just leave it at 1 and 2. You have to make a trilogy. That was 4 years ago when he said that. Um, so I'm optimistic that at some point in time we're gonna get that. And I gotta believe, you gotta trust the man that it's gonna be right, because he made a part two. We were all skeptical, and it dropped, and we were all pleasantly surprised. But the only knock is that towards the end, those songs feel like they're tacked on. And I think you could have cut the fat and just came out with an album that was flawless. Like if I was his A&R, I just would have been like, cut these joints, keep this, because the new Woo record was perfect for introduction, and all these other songs complimented, but this little group of records, we need those off because it feels like it's just dragging on. So there you have. So what do you do when you release Cuban Link 2 and it's successful and you're feeling back from that immobility mishap? Bars. I got bars today, y'all. You released a joint called Shaolin versus Wu Tang, which the title got me hyped because I'm like, oh, he all the way back in that Wu bag. Strawberry Kiwi got another album that I feel like the Lex Diamond story is kind of slept on. It's almost again, like I said, if he says he's coming out with Cuban Link, all of hip hop pays attention. If he just has a new album, everybody's like, "Well, I gotta go to work. I'll be back. Y'all gonna be here? Come on, man. This is Raekwon, man. Listen to this man music when it dropped because I feel like a lot of people tapered off after that. Like they just, I don't know, they didn't want to listen. And this album is dope. Now, this album does have a lot of features on it from a lot of heavy hitters in hip hop. Standout is definitely Nas feature on a record, which is crazy. Nas is crazy on there. The beat's crazy. They start with this speech from Louis Farrakhan. It's it's a dope. I wouldn't mind hearing like a. Let me just fan out real quick on some old head stuff. What if y'all? I would love. I know it's today and all of that, but I would love for Ray and Ghost and Nas and AZ to just make a super group album, right? Get Alchemist, get Derringer, get all the boom bap. Like, why not? Right? Like, y'all, you know, lived your lives in hip hop. Let's just make something for the heads, just to make it. I know Nas making the album with Premier, and that's probably what he's thinking. So he ain't gonna do the super group stuff, but I wouldn't mind seeing it. But this album had a lot of heavy hitter features that worked, in my opinion. Um, and it was pretty dope. So Strawberry Kiwi, man, check out Shaolin versus Wu Tang. Yeah, I slapped on it. But here's the problem. Next, he dropped an album that I ain't gonna hold you, God. Where my killer tape at, God? Okay, it wasn't that bad. It wasn't a mobility. Shark Biters. I'll give it that. This was like the opposite. Now, for years, Raekwon, the opposite of Shaolin versus Wu Tang. I say that because it also had a lot of features, but these features didn't make as much sense as the first one. This was an album that sound like he just wanted to make a bunch of club records. Not all of them were, but man, it was difficult to get through after hearing the Lex Diamond story, where you kind of feel like he's coming back, to hearing Cuban Link 2, where you like he's back. Shaolin versus Wu Tang. Okay, he got a stride going, and then he kind of dips right back down because it felt like, I won't say it felt like a business decision, but it kind of did, or it was just other people he wanted to work with, but it just felt like it was designed for radio, you know, and it just didn't work because that's not why we like Raekwon, you know. Unfortunately, it's kind of a weird thing, and I skipped the project. It's kind of a weird thing because at one point, the Wu, Raekwon, and them, they could get radio spins because hip hop, you know, radio played everything in the early to mid 90s and late 90s also. But you were talking about this album, Feli. Um, I think what does it stand for? Fly International Luxurious Art was the name of it, and of this album. And it was just like, they're not gonna play your party records during this time, right? Whenever this was released, because this is much closer to 2024 than the rest of those albums. So it just felt like a bad plan, you know. Honestly, I get, as an artist, you want to do different stuff, but the beats, the rhymes, the guest features. I think Lil Wayne's on here also. It's not all bad. Don't get me wrong, because obviously I feel like it would be in that bottom tier if it was. But it just was disappointing. And I think again, what it did was tell those people who only show up for Cuban links that there's no reason to check for Ray albums anymore. And this is Exhibit A. This is another reason why, which is weird when you look at how I'm ranking them, because there's really only one bad album so far. Now, the album that I skipped, which I believe happened before, in between Cuban Link 2 and Shaolin versus Wu Tang, was Wu Massacre. This was the compilation album, or the supergroup, the Wu side supergroup, featuring Method Man, Ghostface, and Raekwon. They even had the lead single, Criminology 2, the sequel to Criminology off a Cuban Link album. The excitement and hype was just the same as it was for a new Cuban Link album. The cover was crazy. The cover art for this album was crazy, and it felt like this is going to be nuts. And it was not. Now, some people would put this in the shark biters category, but I feel like Wu Massacre is better than Feli. Feli was an album he talked about, felt like for years, and the way he talked about it, I thought it was going to be crazy, and it was just not what I thought it would be. Wu Massacre was a surprise announcement that we all thought was going to be crazy, because those three get to be together. Method Man on some of the hooks, like it's going to be like what they did with New Wu was sort of like on the Cuban Links 2 album, was sort of like, yo, if they did an album, if they're doing an album together, it's going to be crazy. And it wasn't. And I think in a lot of ways, the expectations were so high for this to be good that when you heard it, it just felt like this is not even close to what I thought we were going to get. So again, I don't think that is Wu Massacre is a bad album. It just didn't live up to expectations. But it's cool. It's decent. It's good. So, and the last album that he released. Now, what is the name of this joint? Because hold up, let's just do a real quick in real time Googling, because I always forget the name. The Wild. Yeah, you know why I always forget the name? Because it's so weird. Raekwon album names tend to reflect, how he be talking on tracks, Cuban Links and Shaolin versus the Wu, the Lex Diamond story. So Wu Massacre, Fly, Fly Luxurious, like, oh, excuse me, Fly International Luxurious Art. That's how he talking, mobility. Like, that's how he talks. And then he drops an album called The Wild. And I thought it was fake at first. I was like, somebody done made some damn mixtape or whatever. Like, get this out of here. But I'm like, oh, this is a real album. So this followed Feli. And you see where that was headed, back to the bottom. But this one, my friends, this is a good album. Knowledge God. It's a good album. Almost Strawberry Kiwi. There's a again, it's kind of like the Lex Diamond story. There's a lot of good on here. And what I like about this album probably the most is, as much as I talked about a Wu aesthetic and us as fans kind of wanting that, um, and every time he made an attempt to use beats that, even if RZA didn't make them, they sound like RZA. But anytime he used beats that were just, hip hop beats that you find on any rapper's album, it just never worked. It just didn't sound good. He didn't sound good over them. But this album does that. It's not a lot of like Wu sounding, RZA sounding type beats on here, but the beats that are on here, they work. And are pretty dope. There's some strong records on here. So the unfortunate part is Again, it's slept on. It's almost like let's for example, even though Nas has more albums than Raekwon, for example, right? The mystique that surrounds Illmatic will always be with Nas, no matter what he drops. Every time he drops something, people sort of want that, no matter what it is. It could be excellent, it could be better. And I know that's sacrilegious, but it could be better than Illmatic. And they still want that. They just want something that reminds them of that, even if it's on a couple of tracks. That's why people love um, the Hit Boy joint Magic so much because it almost feels like old Nas, like old Nas on a cover. Like it feels like that. So Raekwon kind of has the same curse in a lot of ways, or gift and curse, right? You have this legendary pivotal album in hip hop around a time where everybody had to bring their A game with lyrics and beats and had influence. And Cuban Link is right up there with some of the greats, like I mentioned earlier. But people only want you to do something that feels like that. Because every time you do a record or an album that feels like Cuban Link, people love it. But anytime you releasing anything else, they don't go and press play. And unfortunately, The Wild is one of those albums where I was like, yo, this is a good album, and nobody really talking about it because it's not Cuban Link. So there you have it. If you look at what is laid out here on the tier list, in my opinion, Raekwon has one classic in his catalog, two great albums in his catalog, three good albums, one album that's not that good, and then one album that's completely garbage, in my opinion. And I think in a lot of ways, this is pretty good for Raekwon. This means that Raekwon has a solid catalog of music if you're being introduced to him for the first time for you to become a fan. Uh, so I'll leave it at this. How do you rank Raekwon's album? Have you heard all of these albums? What did you think? Did you bail out after Mobilarity and missed a couple of albums and you hop back on the train when Cuban Link 2 dropped? Leave your comments in the comment section below on YouTube. Hit the like button and share it with people you know enjoy this kind of content. Definitely subscribe. We're trying to get to 500 subscribers and we are well on our way. We're around 4 something, so we got to keep going. So the more you share, the more people see it. If they like the content, if they want more, do you want to see me rank other catalogs? I've done Eminem, Snoop. I did Jay-Z and Nas at one point. Then I did Nas, and I've also done Method Man and Redman. And trust me, that was an undertaking. That was a lot of albums to go back and listen to. Um, but also, if you listen to Apple Music, and it's Apple Music is on iPhones as well as Android, I put together a playlist, Raekwon playlist, which also features a couple of songs from those mixtapes I mentioned earlier for you to rock out to. So just hit shuffle on that joint and just listen to Raekwon. Maybe that's how you get into it, right? You press play on the playlist. You hear a couple of joints, you might hear a song, you're like, damn, what album this was on? Oh, this was on Lex Diamond. Maybe I should check that out. Oh, this was on The Wild. Maybe I should check that out. It's a good way to not only give a man his flowers with my own critique of his art, but also, he deserves it. He's one of the greats in the game. So until next time, y'all, be safe. And remember, I'm not a critic. I'm a fan. Peace.